Hey, my name's Chris. Thanks for letting me share. It's an inside joke. To any of you who know, so I just finished reading this book. It's backwards right here, but Rick Rubin, The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And if you've ever read any books that discuss like the juxtaposition between spirituality and creativity, or just imaginative thinking, even if it's not in art, specifically fine art, a lot of what's in this book will probably sound familiar to you. If you're not somebody who does anything creative, but you practice some type of spiritual regimen in your life, a lot of what's in here will probably sound familiar to you. I'm going to start out with like the basics of this book, which is just even the book itself, the physical book. I got mine at the library, but I have the hard copy. I don't even know if there's a paperback. But one thing, I read a lot. I read a ton, and most of the books I get tend to be hardcover. So inevitably, like if you're reading them for long stretches of time, or if you're reading them in bed and you don't have a place to put them in your lap, like the weight of the book is like really kind of crucial to how much focus you can put on the book in one sitting, and like where you can take it. I mean, obviously that's why they made paperbacks, you know. But this is a hardcover book, and it's really, really light. Incredibly light. Like you can read it, you know, one-handed, like pretty easily without any like real wrist fatigue. And that's like a huge plus. That being said, like it doesn't feel like it's a super well-made book. It feels a lot like maybe some of the books that you might get if you self-published something, you know. It feels a little bit like it's kind of, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it would really last under any kind of heavy use, or you know, if you were carrying it around a lot. But that being said, that's just like a positive trait I noticed. It's easy to read, like the spacing and the, you know, it's not like a heavy, I'm not saying, you know, sometimes like, it doesn't mean it's like a not worthwhile book, but like it's just, you know, I've read, you know, 700-800 page like biographies of artists, you know, like Francis Bacon or London Kooning, like any number of those 9th Street women. They're all upwards of 700 pages, sometimes closer to 9, I think, even the Francis Bacon. And like, so like I burned through this, like on top of just being an easy read. Vocabulary isn't really heavy. The typeface is pretty big, so it was just an easy read. I really burned through it, and the way it's broken down is like, you know, it's in chapters, but it isn't. It's sort of got like a topic heading, and at the conclusion of each thing, there's a little bit of like a prose. I don't know if it's actually, it's not a haiku. Some of them I think were haiku, but. Anyway, yeah, so it really, really, if you've ever read The Artist's Way, you know, that obviously has a much heavier focus on specific spiritual elements that it doesn't, you know, necessarily, it does mention the word God quite a bit. He never mentions the word God in here, and I don't say that it's a bad or a good thing. I don't evaluate that either way. I think everybody has if they're spiritual, have a God of their own understanding, and whatever that is. But in here, he speaks of something called the source a lot. And, you know, if you're an artist, you know, not to get too lofty about it, but like you may have just some kind of like connection that you make while you're working, where you draw ideas from, whatever that is. It could be a life force, whatever. But there is a spiritual element to this, and it does, you know, pretty much premise itself on the idea that like you have some kind of at least an interest in understanding that there might be something bigger in your life than your own will. So you can't just force something from your imagination or even into being without some kind of faith, process of faith to materialize whatever it is your idea is, or even where you draw those ideas from, which I suppose a lot of people might relate to transcendental meditation. David Lynch kind of speaks about that kind of stuff. He makes references to, a pond and fishing and things like that. Whatever metaphor you want to use, like he makes reference to that in here. He makes direct references to musicians, artists he's worked with, not by name, but like actual firsthand experiences he's had, like tricks that he's used as a producer to work through creative problems. That like reminded me a lot of like Brian Eno, if anyone's familiar with the oblique strategy cards. It's a similar thing. It's like ways to kind of like see things new, to kind of trick yourself out of any like projection or mental traps or emotional traps you might get in. Collaborating with other people, same kind of thing. Like how do you keep your ego out of the work when you're collaborating? How do you keep your ego out of the work with yourself? But I found this book really, really interesting. There was a couple parts that were a little bit hokey in there. And of course, knowing like what Rick Rubin looks like and everything, lately you've probably seen his videos, clips on social media. He has this kind of like, he's an interesting guy, but he has this, stereotypical kind of guy with a white beard, that anywhere from looking like a guru to just maybe an eccentric, to, that stereotypical like image of what God looks like. I don't think anybody confuses him for God, but I don't think he necessarily in this book somehow implies that he is God. But it's absolutely sympathetic. It's to anyone who's creative. It doesn't imply that you have to be in some special class of person in order to be creative, which I think is super important. It also doesn't imply that like success is merited on like your ability to get rich as an artist, or that if you take work outside, or that having art or creativity in any form as a hobby is somehow less valid, or anything like that. It really takes you outside of the box. And knowing his history, you don't feel like, oh, it has to be, he makes hit records. So if I'm not on his level, then I'm not doing it right. And this will somehow get me to his level of success. And he ultimately like discards that idea that his success, like that because he is wealthy or has some kind of legacy, that's the merit for his success. So anyway, I recommend it. It may be redundant for some people. Other people, they may not relate to it all, but that's like every book, I guess. But I highly suggest, like, especially if you're maybe kind of just exploring your creative self, that like you give this a read. It's really easy. I enjoyed it. It was easy. So thanks for letting me share.